I'm wrong there.
MTPC.org, yeah. Yeah,
But,
I think so.
it's a wealth of information.
Yeah, and they're great. The folks there, Mason has done incredible work for the public accommodations bill that's up now.
Somebody was doing a name change.
Yeah.
A friend of mine called me up and asked, how do I help somebody doing a name change? And I did what you did. I Googled
Yes.
and got to their webpage. And it's like, I'm sending you a link. I mean, this is the most easiest to understand, step by step, how to do this. And first of all, God bless you for doing this work, but you just go to this webpage and,
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing now, I think, or they're about to start a name change clinic. They were contacted by a church, and I'm not going to remember the name of the church, but the church had a bunch of volunteers who really wanted to help MTPC, and so MTPC trained them in how to do name changes. And for folks who don't have other stuff that's sort of complicating the issue, it's a really pretty straightforward. You fill out some papers, you go to a court. There's the name changes that we see at Transformative Justice tend to be folks who have open criminal cases where the court is going to have some concern about, fraud. Or trying to hide your identity some way, or people who are in the middle of asylum cases, where they still have 2 years before their interview, but they want to change their name now. That sort of stuff where it gets a little trickier.
Yeah.
But generally, it's very straightforward.
Now, it's very important too, because if you don't conform to the gender that's on your driver's license, and you're trying to get on a plane.
Yes. Yeah, or the whole issue of having photo ID that matches your presentation that's huge for trans and gender nonconforming folks. That's I think one of the most immediate impacts is somebody looks at your ID and looks at you and goes,
not quite.
And then you're in this sort of untenable position of having to explain yourself, where cisgender people never get asked that.
That's right, and nobody wants to be cross-examined, particularly in those types of situations.
Well, and that information is really not any of that person's business.
No. So, but it is surprising we're in a post-9/11 world, and these things are of critical concern. But I like to go back for a moment because you hit upon a point that I do personal injury law, and I'm sometimes in the same boat as what you said. You can only get justice for so many people because the evidence might come up short, or the laws might not. The laws are such that make it prohibitive to try to get a person some justice. And I don't think people really appreciate that. So that's why I was happy to hear you do this education. Yeah. Because that then reaches the broader public, to go out and educate people on what are the issues and how to interact with people that they're either unaware or nervous about meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good too. So I did a lot of work while I was in law school with the National Lawyers Guild with their street law clinic program. So we did a lot of trainings with, tenants or workers or folks who wanted to know what their rights were when they were interacting with the police, stuff like that. And so we have taken some of those trainings and tailored them a little bit to the folks that we're working with at Transformative Justice. So those trainings are also, I think, important for folks so they know what their rights are, and also so they know, what the law does and what it doesn't do, what remedies are available and what aren't.
You give us an instance of that, like when you're dealing with, for example, when people deal with police officers. Yeah. What's the usual issue that comes up, at least for folks when you're training them?
Well, with trans folks in particular, I think it's partly what we were just talking about. The cops stop someone and ask for their ID, which, by the way, most of the time you don't have to provide. But they ask, and then you are in this position of the cop is looking at your ID and looking at you and going, all right, there's something I don't understand here. Automatically, that must mean I should be suspicious. And so then you're in okay, well now now the cop is thinking that this person is doing something sneaky. And so then there's this whole sort of snowballing thing. There are some specific things. Trans women, particularly trans women of color, are often profiled as sex workers. And so they
Really?
often, yeah, it's huge. It's a huge problem. I don't have numbers in Massachusetts, but I know anecdotally this is a huge problem, and you see this sort of across the country. I don't know if you're familiar with Monica Jones's case. She was in Arizona,
ringing
I
a
think.
bell.
Yeah, but so this is the sort of slang term for it is walking while trans.
Okay. I've never heard that,
Yeah,
but okay.
so this is people, trans women of color particularly, get stopped by the police just for sort of being outside, and are often assumed to be doing sex work, even if they're not, and are then charged with that, and then even if the prosecution doesn't end up going all the way through, that ends up on someone's record. In some states, that means you have to register with the sex offender registry, which has huge implications on where you can live and how you can get a job and can you go to school. Interactions with the legal system generally, particularly the criminal legal system, have huge impacts on housing for folks and employment. And I mean, we all sort of know that, if you end up with a felony charge, you can't get public housing, you can't get loans for school.
You probably can't vote in
Some states you can't vote, depends where you are, yeah. And so for trans folks who are also disproportionately likely to be living in poverty, to be not stably housed, and so to maybe be sleeping outside or sleeping at a shelter, where they're just more exposed to police interactions and to sort of the legal system generally, and not from an advantageous place, those barriers multiply really quickly. And so they're more likely, trans folks are more likely to end up with a felony conviction sometimes, and so that, for folks who are already facing barriers to getting an education or getting housing or getting health care, that just adds one more layer.
Wow. So you try to help some of these folks get some proper housing anyway.
Yeah, so my passion, I guess, is housing law. I really enjoy working with tenants. I really enjoy the speed of housing law, although not always. Sometimes it moves a little too fast.
Yeah.
But I really love those cases, I think.
Cool. And it's a breach of the warranty of implied habitability?
Yes, it is. WOA, as we call it.
Whoa, oh, I haven't heard that, but good.
Warranty of habitability and quiet enjoyment. And there are often violations of the Consumer Protection Statute 93A, often violations of security deposit law.
Yeah.
And so usually for folks, even if they aren't going to get to stay in the apartment, there is often some money in there for them that at least might help them get to the next place without ending up in a shelter.
God willing. So if anybody needed help, employment, housing discrimination, how do they find out? How do they find people like you?
Well, they can find me at transformativelaw.org or 617-720-4200. We're on Beacon Street in the 14 Beacon Street building. You can just come up and say hi. There are other organizations. I mean, obviously, there are organizations like Greater Boston Legal Services. I do a lot of volunteer work with the Volunteer Lawyers Project, and they're great. They're in Housing Court every Thursday in Boston, providing lawyers for the day. Mass Trans Political Caucus we've talked about. Obviously, there's GLAAD.
Yes,
and we
God
work
bless them.
we work pretty closely with Jennifer Levi at the Trans Rights Project.
My goodness, yes.
On cases often on discrimination cases where I'm not as familiar with those, and so I call Jennifer and say, and my co-executive director, Richard Zhuang, does a lot of immigration work. We have a few folks who are seeking asylum right now. He also does. We had this idea, and since we're only 4 months old, it hasn't really taken off yet. But Richard is very interested in community development as sort of business development, small business development for the trans community. And I think that's really important for a community that's traditionally underemployed.
Well, I'm so glad to have you on the show,
Yeah.
to hear about your organization. I think it's wonderful. Certainly it's a community that needs more representation and needs to have their rights defended.
Yeah.
And as I always say, you're doing God's work by helping these folks because everybody deserves justice.
Yeah,
You know?
that's what we think.
So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure to have you. And thank you for tuning in on Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. We're here live third Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock. Please tune in to our next episode of Legal Lines. Thank you very much.